Welcome to This Prepared Life podcast, where homesteading and the apocalypse meet. I'm Allison, your host. Hi, and welcome to This Prepared Life. I'm Allison, your host, and today's episode, we are going to be doing a large overview of food storage. And this is one of those topics that I get a lot of messages about on Instagram, and people, you just have lots of questions about what types of food can be stored, how to store food. So the next couple episodes of the podcast are going to be all about food storage. You can go to the This Prepared Life blog, and a part 2 of the preparedness plan workbook is going to be released soon. And part 2 is going to be all about food storage. And so let's start today by talking about some different levels of food storage. So your first layer of food storage is going to be the pantry and your kitchen. These are the foods that you are currently eating, whether that's for this week or this month. That depends on, what you store in your kitchen. I believe that every single one of us should have a fully stocked kitchen pantry. You should be able to cook any of the meals that your family normally eats from the supplies in your pantry, in your kitchen at any given time. Way back before I called myself a prepper, my kitchen pantry, I always had one extra. So if I had a bottle of oil in my kitchen that was open and I was using it, I had a shelf where I had an extra one, and I had extra baking soda and extra baking powder and extra spices. So that was how, before calling myself a prepper, I kept my kitchen pantry well stocked. For you to keep your kitchen pantry well stocked, you need to know, what does your family eat? So that's just sitting there and making a list and writing down, what are the meals we eat? What are the ingredients that I need to make those meals? And just keeping those supplies on hand. So the next layer that we are going to define is a short-term food supply. And this is food that is usually store-bought or home canned with a shelf life of anywhere from 1 year to several years. These are usually foods that your family eats on a regular basis. So for my family and our food preps, this layer we call our short-term layer or our middle layer, and this is what I restock my kitchen pantry from. So I stock a month's worth of food and ingredients for meals in my kitchen pantry, and then our short-term layer, our goal there is to have a year's worth of the items we use on a regular basis. So I also include our freezers, our home canned food, our home dehydrated food in that short-term food layer. So some of the things that you might stock or might be considered short-term foods are canned fruits and vegetables, soups, canned chilies, canned beans, canned meats like tuna or canned chicken, pasta sauce, salsa, condiments like ketchup or mustard or mayonnaise, peanut butter, jams, jellies, cooking oil, crackers, granola bars, cereal, instant hot cereal. You get the idea. Packaged things, canned things, boxed things, bagged things from the grocery store. Those would all be short-term food layer items. So long-term food layer items, these are foods that can store for longer lengths of time if packaged properly, some for even up to 30 years and others indefinitely. So these foods are typically dry goods that are low in moisture and low in oil content. Moisture causes food to go bad. Oil goes rancid over time. So those are not foods that you want in your long-term food storage layer. So some of the types of foods that are great in a long-term food layer are whole grains, wheat berries, rolled oats, steel cut oats, white rice, spaghetti, macaroni, dried beans, lentils, dried corn, freeze-dried vegetables, freeze-dried fruits, sugar, honey, baking supplies like salt and baking soda, things like powdered dairy or powdered eggs, though they have a shorter shelf life, they do, if packaged properly, have a pretty good shelf life. One of the important things when managing your food storage is protecting food from the things that negatively impact how long that food can be stored. Oxygen, light, moisture, temperature, and bugs and rodents are all things that impact the shelf life of certain foods. Oxygen allows for growth of insects and bacteria. Light produces physical and chemical changes in food. And light not only impacts the food, but it can impact the packaging. Moisture allows bacteria to grow. Temperature, the storage temperature and temperature fluctuations impact the shelf life, the quality, and the nutrients of food. The ideal storage temperature is 40 to 60 degrees. And for every 10-degree drop in temperature, it can up to double the shelf life of a food. So the difference of the shelf life of something stored at 90 degrees versus 60 degrees is huge. And then the last thing, bugs and rodents. No one wants bugs in their food or rodents eating through the packaging of your food. So some of the ways that you can store food, the original packaging. I have things I do not remove from its original packaging if I'm going to eat that within a certain period of time. If it is going to get eaten before its expiration, I may put that original packaging in a bin. If I know that that food is going to get eaten before those things that impact its shelf life can start to affect it, then I'm not going to waste my time repackaging it. Vacuum sealing. So vacuum sealing is a process of taking the air out of the package. And it's this little machine that has bags that you put in, and like on mine, I hit vacuum seal and it sucks out the air and then it heat seals the package. Vacuum sealing over time, air seeps through plastic. Plastic is not 100% impermeable to air. Even plastic buckets will seep air over time. One thing I have noticed with vacuum sealed foods is sometimes I'll open my freezer and there's a thing of vacuum sealed brown rice or beef that is no longer vacuum sealed. And so all it takes is one little puncture in that package for air to now be getting in. So I use vacuum sealing for my short-term layer foods, for my frozen foods, and I use it for home dehydrated fruits and vegetables that are in jars. So I have an attachment called a jar sealer that just slips over the flat lid. I hit the vacuum button and it sucks the air out of the jar and causes it to seal. This is not an alternative to water bath canning food. This is only for dry goods. So that's how I use vacuum sealing. Glass. This is something I use short term and in my mid layer of food storage. Glass is really durable, but it's also fragile. So I don't want to have a ton of jars that can possibly get broken in my long-term storage. Glass also lets light through, and light degrades food. So one handy tip that I do on foods that are in glass jars but going to be sitting on a shelf, all of our old socks, I run them through the washer and they sit in a bin on my food storage shelves. And I will slip a sock over the jar all the way up to the top. So like for an example, I put bulk chocolate chips in jars that I then vacuum seal shut. A sock gets put over that jar, which helps keep the light out. It also helps prevent the jars from banging against each other and possibly breaking. So moms, all of us have a bin of socks with no mate. Those socks now have a purpose. The next way or method that we can store food is Mylar. And Mylar is great, and it is my preferred method for long-term storage of dried goods. So Mylar is actually a brand. It is not a type of packaging, kind of like we say all transparent tape is Scotch tape when really Scotch is the brand. But Mylar bags are a really thin, stretchable layer of a polyester plastic material that then gets an aluminum coating on it to help prevent light from going through. So Mylar is pretty strong. It keeps light out. It keeps oxygen out when used with an oxygen absorber. It keeps moisture out. So Mylar is great for long-term storage. And I use Mylar for anything that is going into that longer layer in my pantry. Next method and supply for food storage are food grade buckets. I use these in my short-term pantry, and I use these in my long-term pantry. In my short-term pantry, flour, sugar, oats, rice, foods that I buy in bulk just get put directly into the bucket, and then I refill my kitchen canisters with the foods in those buckets. And then when a bucket is empty, a new bucket gets taken from my short-term pantry storage layer and put on the shelf where we refill things. And then I buy whatever that item was. Say we used the last of the rice, then I would have an empty rice bucket that I know I need to now buy rice to refill. And that keeps our 1-year food layer rotated. So that's how we use buckets in our short-term layer. And in long-term layer, I line my buckets with Mylar, or the buckets themselves are filled with smaller quarter-gallon bags of Mylar food. For long-term, I want that added protection. The Mylar is filled with oxygen absorbers, so we're keeping out oxygen, we're keeping out moisture. The bucket is just another layer of rodent and bug protection. So for that long-term food layer, I really want multiple ways to protect that food, because our food is an investment. We are spending our time, we are spending our money on this food supply. And if we are not properly taking care of it, then we are throwing money down the drain. One more item or useful method tool for storing food is plastic totes. I use the yellow and black ones that everyone seems to have, and I get mine at Costco. And these are great for organization. They keep light off of food, light off of the food packages, and they're easy to stack. So I am able to fill my tote with my freeze-dried food or my Mylar bags of beans or rice or sugar, and I put those in these totes and I stack them, and those can get put out of the way until it is time to rotate those through into my short-term layer and then eventually my kitchen pantry. Couple things to note about food storage and buckets and totes. Nothing should ever be stored on cement. Cement can wick moisture, and if a plastic bucket is set directly on cement, that moisture can go straight into the bucket. So you always want to put buckets or totes on a piece of wood or just up at least an inch off the ground. The final thing I wanted to talk about today is rotation. So sometimes I think people think about their long-term food storage layer and they're like, I am going to buy these 50 pounds of beans and 100 pounds of rice and put them in Mylar and put them in buckets, and it is going to sit there until I need it 50 years from now. And that is okay to do if that is how you want to do it. I know that for my family, I want to be feeding them the most nutritional food that I can. And so I know that over time, the nutritional content of long-term storage foods is going to degrade a bit. The fresher the food is, the better. Obviously, a fresh carrot that you just picked from your garden is going to be better than a freeze-dried bag of carrots that is 10 years old. So managing a cycle of rotation is important. And that is something that each person is going to have to decide when certain foods are getting rotated, because we all have different tastes. And my family may like canned peaches, but after 3 years and those peaches have gotten a little mushy, they may not like them when they are that texture. So I would know that I need to rotate canned peaches through our pantry faster than that point where they're no longer going to like to eat them. Find out what your family will and will not eat and where the line is for you on when to rotate foods in. So I use a rotational system in our short-term pantry called First In, First Out. It's FIFO, if you see that acronym, rolling around the internet. So First In, First Out means that the oldest item gets used first. So anything in my short-term pantry is dated. I write the date on everything. And when I use something and I buy a new one to replace it, I write the date on it and it goes to the back. So I am always taking the oldest item first, using that in our kitchen pantry and cycling everything through. So first in, first out rotation. And everyone's going to rotate a little differently for their long-term storage. So, and because our long-term storage is not that old right now, probably have stuff that's been in there for a few years now. So I have not started rotating in like my freeze-dried food or our buckets of oats or beans because I still feel that those are within their lifespan. That is, in a nutshell, a large overview of our 3 layers of food storage. We have our kitchen pantry, which is what we are eating now. We have our short-term food, which is for us a 1-year layer of food that I rotate through. And then we have our long-term food storage layer, or our SHTF layer. And these are food items that we are storing for longer periods of time with less rotation through into our pantry. We talked about different ways to store food. We talked about rotating food. And if you have any questions, please find me on Instagram or shoot me an email. You can print part 2 of the preparedness plan workbook at thispreparedlife.blogspot.com. And we're going to talk about all of these things, list out some of the different foods, and then have some worksheets where you can come up with your own plan with what your family eats. Thanks for listening today, and until next time, remember, every little thing matters, and a goal without a plan is just a wish. If you have any questions, feel free and find me on Instagram at thispreparedlife. You can also visit thispreparedlife.blogspot.com. If you enjoyed today's episode, I would love it if you would leave a review on Apple Podcasts.